The neon sign flickered, casting a harsh, artificial buzz over the sidewalk. Leo stood at the edge of the chain-link fence, his eyes locked on the corner store. That was where the street took everything that mattered. Beside him, David stood hunched, his shoulders vibrating with a rhythmic, involuntary twitch. 6 months ago, David was the fastest striker in the district. He moved with a grace that left defenders standing still. Now, he was a collection of sharp angles and trembling hands. His frame had thinned until he looked like he might snap if the wind caught him wrong. The air near the store smelled of stale smoke and damp concrete. Leo watched the dealers move in and out of the shadows, their voices low, their movements calculated. David did not look at them, but his gaze was tethered to the doorway. Every few seconds, his hand would jerk toward his pocket, then snap back to his side, locked in a silent, internal war. He was a ghost of the athlete who once commanded the pitch. Here, in the flickering light, the only thing he commanded was the tremor in his own fingers. Leo reached into his bag and withdrew a ball. It was worn, the leather scuffed from years of friction against pavement and grass. He did not speak, he simply let it drop. The ball hit the asphalt with a heavy, hollow thud that cut through the low-frequency hum of the street. It bounced once, twice, and settled against the toe of David's boot. The sound was sharp enough to make a passing shadow pause. David looked down. His eyes were bloodshot, pupils dilated, shifting back and forth between the scuffed leather and the doorway of the store. Near the entrance, a man in a dark hoodie leaned against the glass. The man tapped his watch, then gestured toward the alleyway with a slow, beckoning sweep of his hand. David's breath hitched. He looked at the ball, then at the beckoning hand, his jaw tightening as the twitch in his fingers accelerated. The air between the two men felt static, charged with the weight of the choice. Leo remained motionless, his hands buried deep in his pockets, leaving the ball as the only bridge between the life David was choosing and the life he was losing. David stared at the leather, his concentration fraying as the dealer motioned again. Leo did not wait for the dealer. He pivoted, stepped back, and swung his leg with a sudden, violent force. His boot connected with the ball, sending it rocketing against the brick wall of the corner store. The impact produced a sharp, percussive crack that echoed like a gunshot across the pavement. The noise shattered the stillness of the street. David flinched, his shoulders jerking toward his ears at the sudden violence of the sound. His eyes widened. The ball rebounded off the wall, spinning hard, rolling directly toward his path. Without thinking, David shifted his weight. His right foot moved with a precision that had been absent for months. He trapped the ball, cushioning the heavy leather against his instep, killing its momentum instantly. The ball stopped dead at his feet. For a heartbeat, the silence returned. But it was different now. The rhythmic, nervous twitch in his hands slowed, then stopped completely. He stood still, his eyes fixed on the leather, his breathing evening out. The connection was immediate. A tactile bridge to a buried reality. The dealer watched from the doorway, but David did not look back. He stood with the ball at his feet, his posture shifting from a slump to a focused, alert readiness. Leo gestured toward the empty lot behind the warehouse, a patch of cracked earth marked by 2 piles of bricks. They turned their backs on the neon sign, walking away from the store. Each stride was a physical confrontation with the gravity of the corner. The street was loud, but in the space between them, the silence was heavy. David walked with a stiff, unnatural gait. His left hand drifted repeatedly toward his side, his fingers brushing the fabric of his pocket. He stopped, his breath hitching in his throat. He leaned forward, his hand diving into the pocket. His fingers closed around the plastic baggie. He hesitated, his knuckles white against the dark material. Leo sensed the shift in momentum before it happened. He did not call out or argue. He moved in, closing the distance in 2 long strides. As David began to pull the baggie free, Leo caught his wrist. The grip was firm, locking David's arm in place mid-motion. There was no aggression in the movement, only a relentless, steady pressure. David strained against the hold, his muscles corded in tight, but Leo did not yield. He stood like a post, anchoring David to the pavement as the urge to turn back clawed at the air between them. Leo exerted steady, downward pressure until David's fingers loosened. He pried the plastic baggie from the trembling hand. David lunged, his fingers clawing at the air, but Leo stepped away, moving toward the iron grate of the storm drain at the curb. He held the bag over the dark opening and let it drop. It hit the stagnant water below with a muffled splash, disappearing into the shadows of the pipes. David watched it fall, his body buckling as if the anchor had been ripped out of his chest. He collapsed to his knees on the cracked pavement, his hands hitting the ground to steady his weight. A sharp, ragged sound tore from his throat, a wet, desperate gasp for air. His skin turned pale and clammy under the streetlights. He hunched over, his forehead nearly touching the asphalt, his chest heaving in short, violent bursts. The withdrawal hit him with the weight of a physical blow. He gripped his own knees, his knuckles straining, as he fought to keep his balance against the nausea and the sudden, hollow ache radiating through his limbs. Leo stood over him, silent and immobile, waiting for the tremors to peak and eventually subside. Leo waited until the tremors slowed to a rhythmic pulse, then tossed the ball back. David caught it, his grip clumsy but firm. They walked the final yards to the makeshift pitch behind the warehouse. No words passed between them. The silence was filled by the sound of their boots on the gravel. David took the first touch, his foot meeting the leather with a dull pop. He pushed the ball forward, lunging into a sprint. His breathing was ragged, torn by the strain in his lungs, but he did not stop. He cut left, then right, weaving through the imaginary defenders. Leo pursued him, forcing the pace, turning every pass into a test of endurance. With every stride, David's sweat turned to a cold sheen on his skin. He felt the weight of the last 6 months burning out of his chest with every exhale. He drove toward the brick pile goal, feet hammering the dirt. Leo lunged, but David shifted his weight, pivoted, and struck the ball clean. It whistled through the gap between the bricks. David stopped, his hands on his knees, and let out a roar that echoed off the warehouse walls, a raw, jagged sound of a man finally breathing on his own. The next morning, the air inside the community center smelled of floor wax and stale sweat. Leo walked to the center of the court, David trailing 3 paces behind. The coach stood near the bench, eyes fixed on the pair as they approached. He held out a mesh training bib. David stared at the bright color for a heartbeat, his hands hovering, before he grabbed the fabric and pulled it over his head. The weight of the team colors seemed to ground him. He stepped onto the hardwood, joining the line of players waiting for the whistle. When it blew, the drill began. David moved with a jagged, desperate intensity, his feet working in a blur as he wove through the plastic cones. He didn't look at the other players. He looked only at the ball. Every touch was firm, every turn tight and deliberate. He pushed through the fatigue, his lungs burning, his focus locked entirely on the rhythm of the game. He was no longer drifting. He was present. He cut across the lane, called for the pass, and drove toward the net with a ferocity that turned the heads of everyone on the court. He was back. The afternoon sun cut across the pitch, casting long, sharp shadows over the grass. David was in the middle of a passing drill, his rhythm steady, his movements precise. Then, the atmosphere shifted. A man leaned against the chain-link fence at the perimeter of the field. The dealer. He did not call out. He simply stood there, his presence a dark blot against the bright afternoon. He raised a hand, a single, deliberate motion toward the alleyway. David paused, the ball still at his feet. The fluid motion of the drill faltered. He looked toward the fence, his jaw tightening. The dealer waited, watching with a hollow, expectant expression. David's pulse quickened, a familiar, cold sensation creeping into his chest. He took a step toward the fence, then stopped, his heel digging into the dirt. The air felt heavier, thick with the memory of the corner store and the pull of the baggie. He looked at the ball, then back at the man. The coach blew his whistle, the sharp sound cutting through the tension. David gripped his hands into fists, his knuckles white, fighting the urge to turn away from the game. The dealer remained, a ghost of the life David was trying to bury, his eyes tracking every flicker of hesitation on David's face. The dealer flicked his wrist, a sharp, demanding gesture. David felt the pull, a familiar gravity, dragging his feet toward the fence. He looked at the man, then at the open field. He pivoted, his back turned fully toward the alleyway. A teammate sent a high, arching cross into the box. David ignored the man at the fence entirely. He tracked the ball, his eyes locked on the white leather as it descended. He jumped, his body extending, and snapped his forehead into the center of the ball. It slammed into the back of the net with a solid, resonant thud. David landed, chest heaving, and spun toward the center of the pitch. Leo was there, hand raised. They collided in a high five that echoed across the grass. The sound was final. David didn't glance back at the fence. He turned his attention back to the game, his movements fluid and purposeful. When he looked toward the perimeter a moment later, the space was empty. The man had vanished into the shadows of the alleyway. The connection was severed. David stood in the center of the field, breathing in the clean, open air, his focus entirely on the next play. 6 months passed, leaving the corner store and the alleyway far behind. The community hall was packed with families and teammates. At the front of the room, the district championship trophy caught the light, gleaming on the center table. David reached out and took the base, his grip firm and steady. He lifted the metal weight, his hands showing no trace of the tremors that once defined his days. He looked across the room, past the cheering crowd, and found Leo leaning against the back wall. The air in the room was warm, filled with the sound of voices and the hum of celebration. David walked through the crowd, carrying the trophy as if it were the proof of his own endurance. He stopped in front of Leo, placed the heavy award on the table between them, and nodded. A simple, silent acknowledgement of everything they had survived. They turned together and pushed open the heavy double doors. The afternoon sun hit them instantly, bright and unfiltered. They stepped out onto the pavement, their shadows trailing behind them, and walked forward into the clean, open light of the street. The past had no place here. They kept walking, side by side, until the hall was a distant memory.